So talking about section 6, we had this question, what did Greek literature contribute to? What values were considered the most important? So you may remember I talked about 3 things that help give the Greeks a sense of culture, a sense of civilization. Remember, the Greeks don't form a single organized government. Right? They don't have that. They have a unified culture. And the first thing, 2 things I emphasized were religion. Remember the Oracle of Delphi, they shared religious beliefs. The other thing were the Olympics. I emphasized the Olympics. Another thing, which is what the question about, was literature, especially heroic age literature. I don't ask you years, but I do want you, if I talk about the heroic age, I want you to know that that means early Greece. And I may talk about, on the test, I may say something about heroic age values or heroic age literature. And that's essentially the work of Homer the poet. Remember, Homer wrote 2 great epics, the Iliad and the Odyssey. And I talked especially about this guy, Odysseus, who you remember was kind of a jerk. He was very arrogant. He cheated on his wife like a whole bunch while she was being loyal to him. He was on a journey that should have just taken a few weeks and it took him 20 years to get back home. His big claim to fame in the war against Troy was he killed a bunch of enemy who were sleeping. And yet he was considered the hero. Because early Greeks, heroic age Greeks, emphasized the idea of winning by any means necessary. He was skilled. That's what was important. Odysseus was someone who got what he wanted. That's the kind of guy we want you to be like. Right? So heroic age literature emphasized warrior values, but not values like, maybe honor or something like that, but the value of being successful, winning by any means necessary. What were the characteristics of Sparta? What were Spartan values? Right? So you may remember that we watched first of all, just so we understand, Sparta was a relatively small city-state at first, but they were really good warriors, and they conquered their neighbors and enslaved their neighbors, a group of people we're going to call Helots. Right? So the Spartans successfully conquered their neighbors, and these people become their slaves, the Helots. The problems that the Spartans dealt with then was they were, though, a minority ruling a majority. There were a lot more Helots than there were Spartans. Right? So they had captured and enslaved a minority, this minority of Spartans had captured and enslaved a majority of other people. So they were always afraid that the Helots would rebel. So the Spartans became the best warriors. They had to be in order to keep control over the Helots. So the Spartans are going to emphasize warrior values even more than other Greeks. And so you may remember we watched that funny video, Horrible Histories, where the little boy was brought in to the advisor because he'd been caught stealing. And at first the advisor was like, I see why you're in trouble, you're wearing shoes. And then they said, he was stealing. It's like, that's good. He got caught stealing, that's bad. Right? And the whole idea here was the Spartans would purposely mistreat their children. They would purposely not give kids enough food to eat so that those kids would then go steal. Because warriors should be sneaky. You should be able to sneak up on the enemy. So you need to learn how to steal. That's a good way to learn how to be sneaky. But if you get caught stealing, that's how you lose a battle. So we'll punish you if you get caught stealing. Not because you were stealing, but because you got caught. And of course you shouldn't wear shoes so you can learn to be tough. You can learn to be strong. And you remember also that video clip, that was the first part. The second part, remember, was Spartan Girl. Right? And there was all these jokes about how she did all these exercises with no clothes. Like that was the joke. She does wrestling with no clothes and so forth. The point that I want to emphasize is not the no clothes part. The point I want to emphasize is that she was exercising, that she was engaging in these sports. The Spartans believed that only strong women that were strong, could give birth to strong warriors and raise strong warriors. So for the Spartans, right, because they were so militaristic, they thought women should also learn to fight. Women should also engage in sports to become stronger so they could raise strong warriors. Now, I want to stress the women weren't actually fighting, but they did understand how to fight and would often be quite strict and know how to instill their boys with military values. Okay. That brings us to these, Hey, that was silly. I closed the PowerPoint. Let's see. Okay, there we go. So, why did Persia invade Greece the second time? The movie 300, of course, is about that. What battle did Greece lose during the second Persian invasion? What battle did they win that won them a war? And what did Themistocles do that helped them to win? Right. So, Xerxes, the guy there that they were poking fun at, the giant with the jewelry store on his face. Thank you. That's the new Persian king, right? His father Darius launched the first Persian invasion, which the Greeks defeated at the Battle of Marathon. Right? So there were 3 battles I wanted you to know. The first was Marathon. That is where the Persians are going to be defeated by Greeks. But Xerxes wants to avenge his father, who's defeated at Marathon by the Greeks, right? Xerxes wants to avenge his father, and he also wants to show that his empire is still strong. Right? Remember, this is an empire that's held together by an emperor. It's a top-down authoritarian empire. So if the emperor's weak, people might start to say, you know what, I don't want to be part of the Persian Empire anymore. Right? If those Greeks can defeat the Persians, maybe we Egyptians, maybe we should be independent. Maybe we should kick out the Persians too. Right? So he has to show he's strong. So he wants to avenge his dad and show he's strong, so he's going to invade again. The Spartan king Leonidas, the most yellingest king in all of history, who's from the Scottish part of Greece, as they joked about in that video clip, he is going to fight the Persians at the Battle of Thermopylae. Right? Now, despite how it's remembered, this was a Greek defeat. Right? The Persians are going to figure out how to get around the Spartans, because the Spartans are betrayed, and someone tells about the secret pass. Much of the movie is based on the early part, though, where the Spartans are using their phalanx. Remember, the phalanx is this Greek military unit where these guys have all these spears aimed outwards, very hard to deal with it. The Persians are not able to stop that. Right? They'll attack again and again and keep losing until, like I said, the Spartans are betrayed, and the Persians learn that you can just go around through this little mountain pass, and it'll hit the Spartans from 2 sides and destroy them. So Thermopylae is a Greek defeat. Right? It's a Greek defeat, and it leaves the way open to Athens. Right? Here's Thermopylae up here. Once that's taken, it's now possible to invade Athens. Right? The Persians can march their army into Athens from there. Now that leads to this guy, Themistocles. After the first Persian invasion, he realized that the Persians would come back. He knew that they weren't just going to invade once, he knew that they would come back. And so when the Athenians, he's from Athens, discover a bunch of silver, he's going to convince them to invest the silver in ships, what are called triremes. And just so you can understand this, I'm not too big on military technology, but this is, I think, will be helpful. These work by ramming the opponents. The goal of a trireme is to ram the opponent and sink their ship. Right? You hit the side of their ship with this ram, it puts a hole in their ship floods and sinks. That's their goal. Now what happens then, the fleet is built, the Spartans are defeated at Thermopylae, and so the Athenians go to the oracle Delphi and say, what should we do? And the first oracle is, you're all doomed, you better just leave. Give up, the Persians are going to destroy you now. But remember, the oracle can be asked again. You have some ability to shape your future by simply asking the oracle again what will happen. The second prophecy is, basically, the city's going to be destroyed, but you can find safety behind the wooden wall. And Themistocles says, this is the wooden wall. So what the Athenians do is they leave their city. They just abandon the city. And the Persians come in and think, oh, these Athenians are nothing. They're easy to defeat. We took their city without a fight. And then the Greek navy, the blue square, pretends to run away from the Persian navy. And the Persians are like, oh, these Athenians, they're pushovers. They're going to be really easy to defeat. And so they chase them into between this part here and the island of Salamis. And notice how that gets the Persians into a very narrow area. Then the Athenians turn around and use their rams to sink the Persian ships. And the Persians can't escape because they're in this very narrow area. So thanks to this wooden wall, thanks to Themistocles' foresight in building this navy, they're able to defeat the Persians. And with that defeat, the Persians have to fall back. Right? The Persians cannot bring reinforcements. They cannot supply their troops. Now they've lost their navy. They have to leave. And so the Athenians and the Greeks are safe. The next question is, what is the historical significance of the Greek victories against the Persian Empire? And there's 2. First, it leaves room for the development of participatory government, democracy, and republics. If the Persians would have just stomped the Greeks, people would say democracy does not work. Democracy makes you weak. But the Greeks win. A smaller country defeats a much larger, more powerful country. So that means democracy can make us strong. Maybe democracy is good. It also leaves the room open for the development of Greek philosophy. There's a problem, though. There's this question now, who will be in charge of Greece? Human beings, we're pretty good at uniting when we have a common enemy. But if you take the common enemy away, then we start fighting with each other. And that goes to this question 13. What allowed Athens to rise to glory? What led to its fall? What allowed it to rise to glory was its navy. Right? The Athenians had their navy. Remember, they built that navy to defeat the Persians. They defeated the Persians. They still have the navy. Right? They defeated the Persians. They still have the navy. And they used that navy to start building an empire and controlling trade. So they expand their power over lots of different Greek city-states. This makes Sparta concerned. Sparta is very jealous of its independence. It doesn't want anyone to threaten its independence. And so Sparta is nervous. Now, Themistocles generally tries to keep Sparta calm, tells the Athenians, don't push Sparta, because Sparta will fight if they feel threatened, and if they fight, we will lose. The Spartans are good soldiers. If we fight them, we will lose. That works for a long time, but remember, then Themistocles gets ostracized. He gets kicked out of the city because people think he's too powerful. And that will lead to the rise of Pericles. Pericles says, I don't care about Sparta. Athens is awesome. Let's let the whole world know that Athens is awesome. So he is going to work for the glory of Athens. He will expand its empire further. He'll have the Parthenon built with this wonderful statue of Athena inside of it, just to show everyone how awesome Athens is. And Sparta, sure enough, feels threatened and attacks Athens. And one question, right, this goes to question 14, right, what were the Peloponnesian Wars, who won them, and why is that important? We're kind of there anyway, we might as well finish it. This leads to the Peloponnesian Wars, right? The Peloponnesian Wars are fought between Sparta and Athens, because Sparta feels threatened by Athens becoming so powerful. And Sparta wins every one of the Peloponnesian Wars. I think there's like 3. Spartan wins every single one. No problem. And Athens is devastated. Why is this important? Sparta doesn't care about unifying Greece. Sparta's not going to unify Greece. Sparta prevents Athens from unifying Greece, but doesn't unify it itself. So Greece will stay politically divided. It'll finally only be unified by people who conquer it from the outside. If Athens would have won these wars, you would have had a Greece unified by democracy. That doesn't happen. Right? Athens wins the wars. Sparta wins the wars. Athens is defeated. So we're not going to have a dominant democratic empire uniting Greece. And Sparta doesn't even bother to unify Greece. They don't care. They just want to be independent. Okay, who was Plato? What question was he trying to answer? What was his solution? How did Greek philosophy develop from Socrates to Plato to Aristotle? What are the characteristics of their philosophies? Why are they important? So this will take a bit, so please bear with me. But remember, there's 3 main Greek philosophers that you should know. Right? Well, and there's a 4th, Hippocrates, as well, that we will mention in the true and false part of the review. But in terms of just straight-out philosophers, there's 3 big ones in Greece. And remember, I gave you that acronym SPA, S-P-A. So remember that. That will help you. But the first, the S of SPA, is Socrates. Remember, Socrates was just your average guy in many respects. He was a stone cutter. He was someone who worked with his hands. He was a veteran. He served in the military. But it was just as like a foot soldier. But he helped in the Persian invasions. He fought against the Persians. But he was just your average, he was like a corporal. So a very low-ranking soldier. And he was known for his love of virtue, and he did participate in democracy, and he would stand up for people who were going to lose, even if they were going to lose because he thought they were right. Right? So I gave you that example of how there was these Greek naval commanders who abandoned their men. Right? The Greeks were defeated in the battle, and some of the commanders, instead of staying behind to save Greek soldiers and sailors who were drowning, they just left. And everyone wanted to execute them because, they abandoned these guys to die. And Socrates said, let's show them mercy. Now he lost the vote, and he knew he would lose, but he didn't care. He thought that was the right thing to do. Now, one of Socrates' friends went to the oracle, right? The oracle keeps coming up, and said to the oracle, who is the wisest person in the world? And the oracle said, your friend Socrates. And the guy went back and told Socrates, and Socrates was shocked by this, and said, the god must be doing something. I need to test this. And so Socrates said, okay, They said, I'm the wisest person in the world. You know what I need to do is I need to find someone wiser than me. Right? If I can find one person wiser than me, then obviously I'm not the wisest person in the world. So remember, he did things like he went to a judge, and he said to the judge, what is justice? He went to a soldier and said, what is courage? He went to a priest and said, what is piety? What is faith? And what he found was, none of those people could answer the question. Each one claimed that they could answer the question, but when Socrates asked them to define it, said, okay, what is courage? They couldn't come up with a definition that made sense. And Socrates said, aha, I understand. Now I know why I'm the wisest person in the world. I'm ignorant, and I admit my ignorance. These people think they're wise, but in fact they're ignorant, and they don't know that they're ignorant. My wisdom comes from me knowing I'm ignorant. That is the first step towards obtaining truth. Only when I admit that I don't know can I learn. Now, what happened then, he learned how to question people, and he went around asking everyone questions, and he was so annoying, right? Socrates so annoying, because he embarrassed people. He made them look bad. Right? He was so annoying. What did the government do to him? They executed him. Right? The government executed him. Right? They executed him for atheism, which is weird because he believed in the gods, but also for corrupting the youth. Basically taught young people how to question authority and tradition and so forth. So Western philosophy kind of starts with this encouragement for us to doubt and question in order to find the truth. And also one thing I want to emphasize, notice how Greek philosophy has changed, or Greek ideals and values have changed, I should say. Remember that Odysseus was praised because he did whatever it took to win? Socrates rejected that. He accepted death because Socrates thought virtue was more important. Right, so Socrates says virtue is the most important thing, not winning. So you can see the values of Socrates triumphing later on over Odysseus. Now, one of the young people who hung around Socrates was a guy named Plato. He's the second in the spa, right? Plato was the second guy. He was a young student of Socrates. He's actually the wrote down what Socrates said. He's the guy that wrote that. Socrates didn't write anything. He wrote down what Socrates said. Now, in questions of development, remember, Socrates just asked questions. That's the major thing Socrates does. He just asks questions. He's known more for a method than for any actual content. But Plato, and remember, Socrates just hung around with people. He just had a bunch of young people who hung around with him, and they shared ideas. Plato actually founded a school. Plato was really organized. He establishes an institution called the Academy, right? The Academy of Athens. And he was haunted by one basic question. What had gone wrong with the polis? Right? Remember, the polis is the Greek term for the city-state. So what had gone wrong with politics? When you think of Plato, think politics. Right? Plato is for politics. Remember, he lived through the Peloponnesian Wars. He saw Athens, all these guys from Athens, he saw Athens destroyed in these wars. And so he had this big question, what had gone wrong with our politics? And so he wrote a book called The Republic that tried to answer this question. And you remember the answer to the question in a word was justice. He had this big question, what had gone wrong with the polis? And then what brings happiness to individuals and order and prosperity to the community? And his fundamental answer was justice. If we have a just political order, if human beings are just, we will do the right thing, we will have a good government and a good society, and people will be happy. But we fundamentally need to focus on justice. So Socrates is so annoying because he keeps asking questions. Plato asks questions too, but he focuses on politics. Aristotle, a student at Plato's academy, so you can see the connection, right? Socrates is kind of the grandfather, Plato is the father, and Aristotle is their kid, you can almost say. Or the grandson, I should say. Aristotle, a student at Plato's academy, he's a multi-talented genius. He writes on topics like physics, music, logic, politics, ethics, and biology. So when you think of Aristotle, think of someone who wants to understand all things. He wants to understand anything and everything. And he uses this basis of questioning and reason established by Socrates and Plato and applies it to everything. All things. Right? So he develops a systematic philosophy that tries to explain anything and everything. And he tries to use reason to understand the world. Now I want to emphasize, this was not science, it was logic. Science is based on direct observation, experimentation. Aristotle just did a lot of thinking and used reason. Sometimes he was wrong. A lot of the times he was wrong. But the key thing is he focused on reason. And only when you accept reason can you have science. Right? A prerequisite for developing science later on is the idea of reason and logic, and he emphasized that a lot. And that's kind of a big debt we owe the Greeks. Now, he was also interested in virtue. Remember, he thought virtue was doing the right thing under all circumstances. Right? Being virtuous is doing the right thing at the right time with the right people. A very vague definition of virtue. But he tried to help us understand that knowing how to be virtuous is kind of a skill you develop. And you can't just sit down and make a bunch of rules because situations are too complex. There's too many things to think about. So remember, he had that example of the golden mean. And we watched that video clip, and there was the guy who saw the old lady being mugged. And the golden mean was this idea of making sure you had the right amount of courage, not too little, not too much. So one option that the guy had was to run away. He just flat out run away and let the old lady be mugged. That's clearly cowardice, a lack of virtue. But should he intervene? Should he go try and fight the mugger? Well, that's where judgment comes in. Is the mugger bigger than me? Does the mugger have a knife and I have a gun? Or does the mugger have a gun and I have nothing? I have to make a judgment call there. If I can intervene successfully, then I should just go ahead and do so. But if the mugger is much stronger than me, is better armed than me, intervening would be too much courage, it would be recklessness. The correct act in that case would be to call for help. I'm not abandoning the old lady, but I know that if I try and intervene, I'm going to fail anyway to help her. Right? If I intervene, the mugger beats me up and then beats her up. I didn't really help her, did I? If I get help, and then together, the police come and defeat the mugger, I have acted courageously in the proper way. Right? That's the idea of the golden mean. In terms of virtue, remember he emphasized this idea of experience, that we get a sense of how to be virtuous through experience. We do something that worked, great. I try and intervene to help the old lady and I get beaten up. That tells me that I need to go to the gym, or next time maybe I should call the cops. Right? I learn through experience. I also learn through moral examples. I find people who I admire, who I think behave properly, and I try and imitate them. Curiously, he was a tutor to Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great did not really listen to him, though, and did not care about virtue, so too bad for Aristotle there. I emphasize also this guy Hippocrates. Hippocrates, I think, shows how he's a synthesis. He shows how virtue and skill come together. Right? Remember, Odysseus emphasized skill, accomplish your goals. Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle emphasize virtue. Hippocrates puts these together and argues that our skill should be guided by virtue. Our skill should be guided by virtue. Remember, he's a doctor, and he comes up with a Hippocratic oath in which the doctor swears to do what's best for the patient. I'm going to treat the patient based on what they need. I'm not going to charge the patient for a lot of expensive medicines they don't need so I can buy a car. I'm going to do what's in the best interest of the patient. So I'm going to use my skill, that's the Odysseus part, to best serve my patients. That's the Socrates, Plato, Aristotle part. He joins those ideas together quite well. Okay.